Hi, this is Dr. Sana Hashmi, and my last Prince High on China column was on the Chinese discourse on the status of Chinese manufacturing. So, China isn't just world's factory anymore. That was the statement from Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng when he was at Davos. In his speech, he instead talked about China wanting to become the world's biggest market as well. Of course, big words, specifically when there is a lot of trade imbalance which favors China and the accusations of China dumping its good across the world. But what does that really mean for global manufacturing and for China itself? So let's start with the big picture. Major economies are have responded to China's dominance by coming up with concepts, initiatives such as decoupling, de-risking, and even some have taken protectionist measures and tariffs, of course. But take Apple, for example. They have been moving part of the production to India. And there has been a larger debate about made in China versus made in India, specifically with respect to iPhones. But there is a lot of truth here. By 2025, the share of iPhones made in China for the US market dropped from 70% to just 25%. That's actually a huge number. And much of this production actually moved to India. So, yes, China is facing challenges in manufacturing, but the discourse and the reality on the ground is a bit more nuanced. So, inside China, uh, manufacturing is showing real signs of resilience. At least this is what a number of commentators, analysts, and the internet users are saying. So let's talk about data first. So the Chinese National Bureau of Statistics reported that the Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index (PMI) uh, for a shorter period of time, particularly in December, hit 50.1, and that is technically back in expansion territory for the first time since April last year, of course. So, new orders for higher value sectors like agricultural processing and high end equipment were strong to over 56%. But in January 2026, there was a slight dip, and the PMI figure reached 49.3. But despite this drop, a number of Chinese analysts argue that it is a temporary blip, and the country is expected to remain the world's largest manufacturer for the 16th straight year. So, what is driving this resilience? So, the Chinese discourse narrative is that it's all about structure. Big and medium sized firms are expanding, smaller ones are feeling they squeeze. So, but that's a part of larger transition. So, of course, in this development, small and medium enterprises are the ones that are suffering, but it is not really impacting the large enterprises. And China is moving from mass produced low value goods towards high tech, high value products. And in this context, Ali Takoi, who is a professor at Tsinghua University, he points out that this is more just an upgrade. It is a shift in strategy from the Chinese side. And during the 14th five-year plan, China grew fast in areas such as new energy vehicles, shipbuilding, and high-end equipment. 5G and the industrial internet are also helping traditional and emerging sectors that actually work together. And then, according to a CCTV reporter, Chiang Wei, China now hosts nearly half of the world's so called lighthouse factories that are actually high tech, smart, and green. Now, let's circle back to the US market. The move towards made in India iPhones is a challenge for China. And even though they are not talking about it as much, but if we dig deeper into the Chinese discourse, that is actually a bigger threat for China in terms of manufacturing. But analysts say the long term solution isn't just about keeping costs low, it is about upgrading the whole industry. It is about investing in R&D and boosting product value. So diversifying market is seen as a smart buffer against shocks and not as a threat. So this made in India iPhone trend is considered as something that is actually a short-term shock, not a long-term threat. And domestically, commentary reflects this trajectory. A popular post on Weibo actually summed it up, and it was that the road to upgrading made in China, first cars, now ships, soon machines, first domestic substitution than international expansion. And in fact, there were recent news that Chinese shipbuilding industry is now seeing a lot of expansion, and it is actually reaching at a higher level. So, green and intelligent manufacturing aren't just buzzwords for China. They are now becoming central to China's strategy. Rising green consumption, low carbon tech, and renewable energy are driving innovation. So, 2025 last year was seen as a year where there were efforts that strengthened China's competitiveness and resilience. So even the slight drop, PMI drop in January is framed in this context. So a number of commentators say that it's a micro level signal. Weak demand in some areas, pressure on small businesses, but the big picture remains strong for China. China has structurally robust sectors like high tech manufacturing. These sectors are, according to the discourse in China, still thriving, and policy support is actually backing them. And at the macro level, initiatives like Made in China 2025 and what comes after this, new quality productivity, are guiding long term industrial strategy. So, external pressures like Western trade restrictions have actually accelerated domestic self reliance. So, the idea, if we look at the Chinese discourse, is pretty clear that what China is doing is balancing global competition with domestic structural upgrading. So, what is my takeaway? My takeaway is that China's manufacturing sector faces real challenges, and that is also being talked about. But what they also believe that China is adapting fast. There are short term bumps like the PMI dip, and they are just short term, and this is not something that China needs to be worried about. The broader picture shows resilience, innovation, and long term planning. And manufacturing isn't just China's past, it is a key part of its future, now smarter, greener, and more high tech than ever. So, this idea that China may no longer be the manufacturing hub of the world, this is something that we are not at least seeing in the Chinese discourse. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.